Who would have ever guessed that the Israeli component of it would cause such rancor amongst the Democrat members of the House? Who would have guessed we would have such a discussion on the Republican side about trying to slow down Putin, the dictator in Russia, from taking over his neighbors? When would have a debate about a major infrastructure piece like the bridge in Baltimore going down? This is just a complicated set of times we're in, guys, but we have to get our work done, and I'm an eternal optimist, or I wouldn't be here.
Right, and you do have a vote even if you aren't an appropriator or in leadership, Congressman, so it raises the question of what it is exactly you would be willing to use that vote for. Mike Johnson has suggested Ukraine aid could come to the floor in potentially a different form than what we saw in the Senate, for perhaps a loan instead of just outright aid, or perhaps using frozen Russian assets. What is it that you would support? What would Ukraine aid need to look like for you for it to get your vote?
Well, I won't make the final decision, but whether it's a loan or outright money, as long as it addresses all our allies around the world, as long as we make sure our friends in Taiwan can purchase the resources they need, as long as we make sure the infrastructure in this country is functioning. You can't have a port of the magnitude of importance as Baltimore stay down for an extended period. That just creates chaos throughout the system. Whatever we come up with, but it has to factor all those pieces in. There's not much legislative session left in the 2024 legislative calendar. This is re-election season. This is presidential campaign year. So I would think that management on both sides of the building and both sides of the room will put all this together in whatever the ultimate form is, and it'll come to the floor. And remember, we may organize by Republican caucus and Democrat caucus, but as you noted a moment ago, every member has his or her own vote to cast on behalf of their constituents.
Well, that's right. And you referred to one of your colleagues. I think you might have been referring to the gentlewoman from Georgia earlier. If the Speaker of the House pursues the path that you just outlined, including funding for Ukraine, will it get him fired?
I think that's an issue that we'll have to decide when we get there. Will the trigger be pulled? Will the trigger be pulled, assuming we can pass the bill? What will the Democrats on the other side do? They had a lot of fun by supporting a handful of my colleagues in pitching out Speaker McCarthy. But we're now at a point in time where having fun, political gain, is not in the best interest of ourselves or our allies. They're going to have to be responsible too. The whole body elects the Speaker. The whole body has to make the decision about removing a Speaker.
But as you point out, Congressman, 8 of your Republican conference colleagues did vote to oust McCarthy back in the fall. Do you think there would be 8 or even any more than just one single vote, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who would be willing to cast a vote like that again? Have you heard of anyone who is on her side when it comes to this question around a motion to vacate?
I have not heard of anyone out there rattling the saber to bring his speakership to an end, besides one member.
Okay, that's interesting, because we're hearing from a few Democratic members who've said that they might move to help protect the Speaker and not have to go through this whole ordeal again. Is that the way this ends? He brings Ukraine funding to the floor, supported by Republicans like yourself and Democrats, in an effort to keep his job if Democrats are standing by?
Speaker has a responsibility to bring the best possible packages to the floor in the interest of the country, in the interest of our allies. We have a responsibility to step up and vote on that. Farm bills always are bipartisan. NDAAs are always bipartisan. The appropriation bills in normal times are always bipartisan. We just have to let the body work its will. I have faith in the body.
Well, and of course, Congressman, the body doesn't always necessarily agree with itself, or at least the different parties within the body, on certain issues. And FISA is an example. You mentioned at the top that that is on your to-do list. There are really bipartisan members who have concerns on either end, one being the more intelligence-oriented who want to make sure that warrantless surveillance can continue. On the other side, you have those looking for more privacy protections for Americans who may be caught up in this kind of surveillance. Where do you fall on this issue, sir? Will you vote either way, or is there one that you would prefer to see the Speaker put forward?
The first key element in FISA is it is a temporary authorization. It's not permanent law. So it reflects the times we live in. Maybe we're not being attacked every day on the shores of the United States, but our allies, our friends around the world are under assault, both economically and militarily. we have an obligation to use the resources that are necessary to protect ourselves and to protect our allies when we have a common mutual interest. Voting for language that continues that security, because if anyone thinks that the Chinese Communist Party, if anyone thinks that Mr. Putin's dictatorship is not trying to use every available resource to disrupt democracies in the West, you're pretty damn naive.
Interesting scenario to see a bill that, of course, Joe Biden is pushing, and I know Republicans like yourself are pushing as well. Mike Pompeo has been briefing members in the House to underscore the urgency and the need for funding in Ukraine. Whose argument is resonating with your caucus?
I don't know that I can answer that question at this moment. I believe that when my colleagues sit down and look at the intelligence, when they look at the information coming from the appropriate committees, when they look at the world situation, they realize you cannot let Mr. Putin prevail in the Ukraine. Why else would his neighbors in Finland and Sweden, after being neutral for decades or centuries, so frantically joined NATO? They fear that this is the beginning of another 1930s, and they don't want to be occupied as their grandparents' generation was in the 1930s and 40s.